Good afternoon, and they're bringing in the jury. Are we ready to go, counsel?
Yes, sir. Yes, Your Honor.
We're bringing in the jury. Good afternoon, you may be seated. State, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Lieutenant Frank Tomlinson.
Lieutenant, come up. Do we swear you in? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give the truth and the bounty of law? Yes, sir. Okay, go ahead and take a seat then and get up close to the microphone so they can hear you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state and spell your name, please?
Frank Tomlinson, F-R-A-N-K-T-O-M-L-I-N-S-O-N.
And where do you work, sir?
Sandoval County Sheriff's Office.
What is your position at the Sandoval County Sheriff's Department?
Currently, I'm a lieutenant over our criminal investigations, our civil division, animal control, SROs, school resource officers, and hopefully soon chaplains.
Okay. And what was your assignment, sir, in 2020?
In 2020, at that time, I believe I was assigned to just patrol.
Okay. And are you a full-time sworn, salaried, and commissioned peace officer?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been with the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office?
Since 2016, so 8 years.
Okay. And prior to your time with the Sandoval County Sheriff's Department, where did you work previously? Have you worked in other law enforcement entities?
Yes. Previously, before coming to Sandoval County, I was with Corrales for about 8 or 10 years. Prior to that, I've worked for tribal agencies such as Sandia and Pueblo of Jemez. I originally got my New Mexico certification in 1997.
Okay. So how long is your total time in law enforcement?
27, 26 years.
Okay. So as the, you said you were a sergeant over field at the time in 2020?
No, I was a lieutenant over
The
patrol.
lieutenant over the field? What were your duties as the lieutenant?
At that time, I was basically just in charge of the patrol operations, supervising sergeants and patrol deputies, and everything that it handles on a day-to-day basis. During the time of this incident, I was the lieutenant over CID, I believe was out of town, and I was filling in and taking over his responsibilities as far as on-call.
Can you tell the jury what CID is?
Criminal Investigations Division.
Okay. So what kind of specialized training have you undergone, sir?
Currently, I have a command level certification through the state, which requires, I believe it's approximately 15 or 1,500 hours of advanced training in any different fields. Most of mine have been in investigations related, white collar, violent crime, sexual assaults, and so forth, crime scene processing.
Okay. Do you have another position that you also employ as well?
Up to a month ago, I was also employed by the Office of the Medical Investigator.
And what was your position there?
I'm a field deputy medical investigator.
And what do you do in that capacity, sir?
So at the time when I was working, I would respond to scenes, conduct a field investigation, which included examination of the body, photographing, working with law enforcement, conducting medical-related interviews, basically gathering all the information that I could for the doctors down at the main office in case they needed to perform any autopsies and such forth.
Okay. So you would be conducting an investigation alongside law enforcement as well?
Yes, yes. The system's designed to basically parallel law enforcement, and the theory is that if we both come to the basic same conclusion as to why this person is deceased, then we got it right.
And how long did you do that position for?
2014 is when I started, so 8 years.
Okay. And what kind of training did you undergo for that position?
When I first started, most of it's field. You take basically a 1-week training class. I put myself through different online classes, through different available areas that they would provide to us on different aspects of death investigation. Plus, I also took death investigation classes for my full-time job at the Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And did you take classes on collecting evidence?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Throughout the years, covers photography, covers collection of samples, both medically and with the Sheriff's Department, also for evidence purposes. How to process a body, how to process a scene. It's too broad, really, to get too specific.
Okay. So as a law enforcement officer and not in your position as an OMI investigator, how many major crime scene investigations have you been the lead on?
I would say a lead probably 20 or more.
Okay. And how many times have you had to testify in court based on those investigations in which you were the lead on?
Maybe 5 or 6.
Okay. How many crime scene or major crime scene investigations have you assisted on as a law enforcement officer?
Probably over 50. And that includes from, controlling traffic control at the scene to being number 2 on the investigative team.
Okay. So is Sandoval County Sheriff's Office a large law enforcement entity?
I would define it more as a medium. We have, I believe we're budgeted for 60 sworn. I could be wrong about the exact number, but it's approximately there. We run, normally our staffing runs anywhere between 50 and 60 at any given time.
What is a sworn?
There's they're certified officers or in training and going to be certified officers.
Okay. And in 2020, was the numbers the same, or were they higher or lower?
I can't be exact, but I believe they were closer to the 55 versus 60. I know we got an increase in deputies over the past 2 years.
Okay. So can you tell the jury roughly how many deputies there are on every shift?
In 2020, there was, for the entire county, it averaged, we had a minimum staffing of 4, and normally, so it would run between 4 and 6 on a shift at a time.
Okay. And how many violent crime detectives did you have in 2020?
So in 2020, we didn't really have a violent crime detective per se.
Okay.
We had a detective sergeant, Sergeant Griffin, and then we had 2 other detectives, and they would just switch off on who would take what case, whatever came up. It was more of an on-call type situation.
Okay, so they rotated based on on-call shifts?
Yes.
Where is your main office at?
Right downstairs. So in this building, it's right downstairs on the north side.
Are there any substations?
We don't have substations per se. We're allowed, like in Jemez, we can use their facility if we need to. In Cuba, we can use their facility sometimes, for paperwork, bathroom processing, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so what areas does the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office cover?
It's one of the largest geographic areas in the state that we're required to cover. We go approximately to Counselors, which is about 100 miles from here, up 550 past Cuba, all the way through Jemez to the border of Los Alamos, to Cochiti Lake and Highway 22, Highway 16. We also go to the East Mountain off of Highway 14. We have areas up there, La Madera. And then, of course, we do cover a large portion of Navajo Nation out around the area of Torreon. San Luis, we go all the way through Rio Rancho up until it borders with Albuquerque, and part of Pueblo Sandia is also included.
And Cuba as well? I know I have
Yes.
places there as well.
Yes.
Okay, so can you tell the jury about the CAD system, so the computer-aided dispatch, in 2020?
In the CAD system, which is computer-aided dispatch, it's the same system that we have today. The difference was in 2020, we didn't have it in our vehicles. So we didn't have computers in our vehicles, as you see a lot on cops and so forth, TV shows. We couldn't pull up someone's picture. We couldn't do anything. We didn't have a computer in our vehicle. The CAD system itself at dispatch was still the same CAD system. So they would dispatch calls, take notes, put information in the calls for service, but we just didn't have real-time access. They would have to provide that information over the radio.
So can you tell the jury someone would call in and then someone on the other line would type up a log? Is that how you would call it?
A log's a fair assessment.
And then more information would come in and they would add it to that log?
Correct.
For the call?
For the call.
Okay. So how would a deputy get information?
So a deputy, if it was something simple and quick, he would use the radio, and we would just process, they would just communicate with dispatch or other units that way. If it was going to be a long, drawn-out conversation, so only one deputy can talk on the radio at a time. So to avoid, for safety reasons, another deputy needing to get on the radio for emergency, and he couldn't, if they had cell service, they would call in via telephone to dispatch, but that wasn't necessarily logged or monitored or anything. So it bounced between the two depending on the situation.
Okay. And was this like real time that this log was being created, or is there any sort of delay, or can you tell the jury about that?
So when they're getting the information, it's not like it's voice activated and it reads the transmission. A dispatcher actually has to type in whatever information in phrases and use their own, I guess, shorthand, sometimes in a way. So there's an accountability for like misspellings and stuff, because they're listening to different avenues of information and trying to put this all in the log. So they could be processing 2 or 3 different conversations at the same time.
Okay. So you testify that Sandia County is a large area of land that you guys have to cover for your age. Sorry.
That's okay.
And this has a lot of different geographical features: mountains, hills, canyons.
Yes.
How does that affect your radio transmissions?
Oh, absolutely horrible. It can be so bad at times. Deputies can go to certain areas. We call them the dead spots. And if they have to do anything in that area, they have no communication with dispatch or anyone via cell phone or radio. As anybody's been to Jemez through the mountains, you get up there, there's no way to contact people sometimes. So they would have to do law enforcement jobs without any request for backup, without any information. So and these spots are not like just in the mountains. They can be in hilly places, distance, everything. So we have our dead spots that we've identified.
Does this happen in other cases or just this one?
Oh, it happens daily, whether it's a call for service or whether it's a major crime investigation. It doesn't change the geographics.
Okay. What kind of funding does the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office get?
To my knowledge, I'm not really involved too much in the budget issue at my rank. We get most of...
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay. I'll move on. Let's talk about the body camera issue. Okay.
Sure.
So in 2020, did every deputy have a camera?
If one was available.
Okay. Tell us about that.
So in 2020, we were using, if possible, a system from a Digital Ally. It's a body camera system. We only had so many. They were common to break down. So we tried to keep our deputies in working ones as we could. And then if one would break, our budget might not allow for them to be repaired. They're quite expensive to repair. Some were beyond repair, and we wouldn't replace them. We tried to supplement with digital cassette tape recorders that we would belt tapes, if you'd call them, just to try to give the deputies every opportunity to record their interactions.
Did deputies sometimes have to purchase their own, or did they have that option?
The deputies did have the option to purchase and use their own belt tapes, their own, at that time, the cameras were becoming a little bit more affordable for personal use, so if they wanted to buy their own, they would.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the belt tape thing. How did that work?
So a belt tape's a digital recorder. My use of them is normally if I'm doing field investigations and I'm conducting an interview, I will run that tape to record the interaction. Deputies in the field, if they didn't have a lapel cam and they did have a digital recorder, they would keep it on their belt. And when they came into contact with an individual, they would turn it on, and it only captures audio. Of course, it would capture more of what the deputy was saying because it's right here. It's either in their pocket, on the belt, it's with their person, versus talking like to Ms. Walker, who's a distance away. It's not going to come as clear, but at least it's something.
Okay, so let's talk about the date of this incident, February 29th, 2020. Were you on duty that day?
Actually, I believe I was at home. It was after 5 o'clock, and I received a call.
Okay, so what was your role in this investigation?
It started as a lieutenant. It started out as just being able to call out personnel and resources to assist with this investigation. So I contacted Sergeant Griffin. I believe he was also off. Advised him to start his detectives and to handle the scene and call me if he needed me.
So initially then, was your role in the investigation more as supervisory because you were in the chain of command to be called?
In the
assist?
in the initial part.
Yes. And then what eventually became your role?
Eventually it became my role due to personnel that I was going to be co-detective with Sergeant Griffin, who had proceeded to the scene because there was no availability of anyone else.
Okay. How many homicide investigations does the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office do in a typical year?
Typically now, it's very spotty, and it's not necessarily homicides that occur in the county. We also attribute it to, if someone, for lack of a better term, leaves a body in the county, we also count that as a homicide investigation. And we'll do maybe an average of 4 or 5. It's just every year is different.
Okay. How many did you do in 2020?
In 2020, for the department?
Yes, for the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office.
I believe we did 4 or 5, counting this one.
Okay. So in this case, you were called to help because you're in the chain of command. Tell us what happened.
At that time, I made the determination that Sergeant Griffin would proceed to the scene, handle the crime scene, and I would remain at being maybe a command post is what you'd call it, which is me in my office, to arrange any logistical help, contact state police for a crime scene if necessary, prepare any warrants that we needed exigency on for like the residents and the property that they were going to, communicate with the district attorney, and basically just have a place have a place where I had good internet, good cell phone service, and I could make phone calls because they didn't.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The call comes out. What time was the call received by dispatch?
Can I refer to the CAD just for accuracy's sake?
Yes, sir. If the CAD will refresh your memory.
Thank you.
You want to just lead instead of?
I'm going to lead you by no objection by the defense.
Okay.
So, sir, did the call come into dispatch at about 17:31?
Yes.
How is the accuracy of the times on that?
It can be plus or minus minutes, because again, they're logging this in manually. So it could take a minute or two for them to actually put in information, depending on how they're busy.
Okay. And the calling party was Mr. McCullough?
I believe so, yes.
What time did the call from the Bureau of Indian Affairs come in?
I believe the original call was at 5:43 p.m., but it was not logged until 5:49.
Okay. And who made that call?
It was reported by BAA to be a gentleman named Dean Cummings.
Okay. And so the time difference from the call for Mr. McCullough and the call for Mr. Cummings was about 12 minutes?
Approximately.
And Your Honor, at this time, the state would request to publish Exhibit 2, which is the 911 call made from the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
No objection.
Go ahead, Counsel, let me publish it. Are you playing it off your laptop there?
I forgot the audio cord. It's
What's the
on.
problem?
I have it on.
Oh,
Computer logistics.
oh, I see.
There we go.
Sandoval County Police Fire and Rescue. This is Jared. How can I help you?
Hi, this is Cumberland Police Department. Copy 353-10-4-1745. Hi, I have a call for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I have a male individual, first name of Dean
Okay.
Cummings.
Do you have a call for me, though?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can you go with the address first?
Yes, it's going to be 4 miles in on Cabazon Peak.
Okay. Okay, and what have you got?
I have a male individual, Dean Cummings. Phone number 907-831-6512.
Okay.
He said that he was attacked by a male individual, Guillaume. Only first name given.
Can you spell that for me?
First name George, Edward, Ocean, Mary, Edward.
Okay.
He said that he was attacked by this male individual. He tried to defend himself, got a hold of his weapon. He had a gun. He did shoot the individual. He said that the individual is dead.
Okay, we do have a call up already. Let me make sure that these aren't correlating. When did he call you?
He called me at 17:43.
And give me the location once more.
Okay, he told me 4 miles in on the Cabazon Peak Monument Trail, the BLM Monument Trail. It's going to be a ranch house, like a ranch. Trailer. There are 2 trailers there. One's a Hallmark trailer, and then there's 2 gates.
Hallmark?
Yeah.
And it should be right near the gate?
Yeah, he said it's going to be, there should be 2 gates there.
What was the name of that trail again?
The Cabazon Peak Trail, or Monument Trail Access. He said it's a BLM Monument Trail Access. towards the volcano.
Okay, what was your name again?
Andrea.
Did you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
So that call was relayed to Sandoval County Dispatch about 20 minutes after Mr. McCullough's call?
I believe so.
Okay. Tell us how messages between you at the command post here at Sandoval County Sheriff's Office and the people on scene, how were they relayed back and forth?
That was an adventure. Because there was no cell phone service and very limited radio traffic, and I was in my office, I would have to telephone dispatch, have them get on the radio to reach a unit at the scene, to drive to an area to give me a call, and back and forth. We couldn't tie up any of the main lines on the radio because local wouldn't reach me here in Albuquerque, so we had to do it via telephone like that. I probably did that. I mean, on CAD, it's documented, I believe, 6 times that I called in, had them call someone, go to some place, call me, and then they would have to go back to the scene, do whatever I needed them to do, and then come back to the area, call me back again. So it took a long time. Every once in a while, if I needed something, I would try a deputy that might have still be at the cell phone location, and approach. So not all the times I did this was related to CAD. It wouldn't go through dispatch. And I can't tell you how many times I tried that.
Okay, so what sheriff's deputies responded to the scene?
Initially at the scene, it was Deputy Hayden Walker.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm only objecting because it's cumulative. We've heard all of this from.
He has not
different
testified to
officers.
this.
Okay, I'll let her continue on.
Thank you, sir. So Deputy Walker responded to the ranch,
Yes. And
Deputy Honey Estua,
yes.
and Sergeant Crispin.
Yes, that was the initial response.
And on February 29th, you never went to the ranch?
No, I did not.
Okay. You said that you stayed back at the office and ran background checks and handled the logistics, right?
Correct.
Were you able, as part of that, to determine what Mr. Cummings' height and weight was?
Via his driver's license information, because I'd never seen him. That's what I received my information off of.
Okay, and was he about 5'11" and 165 pounds?
According to his driver's license.
Okay. Now, Mr. Cummings was eventually transported back to the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office, right?
Yes.
And was that, what time was that at? About 10 p.m.?
About, yes.
Okay. And did Mr. Cummings consent to having his DNA swabs taken and swabs of his face and hands?
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury how DNA swabs are taken from somebody?
For a DNA sample, he's provided usually 2 sealed Q-tips. He takes it and swirls it around in his mouth for about 30 to 45 seconds. Then it's placed in a small envelope once it's dried, which doesn't take very long, and then in a larger envelope, and then that's all sealed up to collect any other samples.
Well, and then obviously you probably use personal protective gear, gloves, things
absolutely.
like that.
Gloves, and I would just hand him the Q-tip. I wouldn't even do it. You hand it and they do it themselves.
Okay. Who assisted Mr. Cummings with doing these swabs?
I did. Okay.
And did you also swab his hands and face?
Yes.
Can you tell us how you did that?
I had a bottle of water similar to this. This is all we had available. And I would take the swab and get it in the water to where it was damp. And I wiped his each side of his face and his hands. I believe it was the top and the palms, as I recall.
So, and this was a new bottle of water?
Yes, it was sealed.
Okay. Can you show the jury on your own face where you swabbed Mr. Cummings?
If my normal procedure would be to swab each side, maybe in the forehead, and then the hands, and then the top.
So you did the palms of both of his hands as well as the tops of his hands?
That would be how I normally do it. I can't recall exactly that day, but that's how I would normally process.
And where was this done at?
At the sheriff's office.
When you were swabbing Mr. Cummings or assisting him with swabbing himself, did he have any injuries that were visible to you?
No.
Okay. And then what happened to those swabs from Mr. Cummings' person?
They were sealed similar to the DNA standard in a small envelope and then in a larger envelope, and they were sealed and then tagged in as evidence.
Okay. And was Mr. Cummings medically cleared at the hospital?
Yes.
Now, the portion of the investigation going on at the scene, what time did that wrap up?
The last CAD report shows, I believe it's Sergeant Griffin coming to the office about 1:33, 1:35, the next day, March 1st.
So is that AM or PM?
PM. And I can't tell you if anybody was left at the scene after that, but according to CAD, that's the last person that left.
Okay. And who collected the evidence from the state police?
Sergeant Griffin.
And that would have been the rifle, the mace, the 11 spent cartridge casings, and the magazine from the stairs, right?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about how evidence is handled in your agency. So when evidence is collected from a scene, what happens to it? Or at least in 2020. Let's talk about it then.
Sure. So the deputy would come to the station. They would prepare at the time we were using a system called UDS. They'd prepare that system. On that system, they would enter the stuff as evidence, safekeeping, found property, log it in, create a evidence report. Then they would print that, take it, and we have lockers in our evidence room that are two-way. So they would put it in one locker one way, shut the door, secure it, and then the evidence tech the next day would come in, open it up, and then process it and store it and confirm the inventory.
So this system you said UDIS, does it give each individual piece of evidence an item number?
Yes, it does. Well, I'm sorry. It doesn't give us a number. It has a place where we would track our own numbers.
Okay. So this is like a running ledger or report.
Correct.
Does it document who tags something in and what time they tag it in?
Yes.
All right. So would this have been the same process for the evidence Sergeant Griffin collected from the state police?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm handing you Exhibit 30 that's already been admitted. Was this evidence collected during your investigation in this case?
Yes.
Your Honor, we need to approach.
You may.
Okay, sir. Let's talk about the body of Mr. Arriola. OMI collected the body from the scene, correct?
Correct.
Typically, tell us how a body is processed for evidence by OMI.
So a field investigator is going to go to the scene, photograph the entire area. They're going to photograph the body. They're going to photograph weapons or drugs or anything they find on scene.
Let me be more specific.
Oh,
Tell
sure.
us about how, like, the hands are bagged and the fingernail clippings, and how is that kind of evidence collected from a decedent?
Gotcha. When it's when he's preparing the body for transport, some deputies, depending on the nature of the decedent, will bag their hands. I cannot testify if his hands were bagged at this time, but that would be a normal procedure that I would do. He's then placed in a body bag and sealed with a tag, and then transport would take them down to OMI in Albuquerque.
Okay. And then at OMI in Albuquerque, do they then do the clippings, and what do they do with the body in Albuquerque?
So what I've witnessed and been part of is normally, and I can't quote from their exact SOP because that's a different division at work, but they would, when it's time for autopsy, they would bring it in, do photos, clothe, they would unclothe them, go through the clothing, secure any items that were found in the clothing. Once the decedent was not wearing any clothes, they would do more photographs, then they would do fingernail clippings and tag those in. Also, I believe they do DNA at that time, and then they would proceed with the autopsy. I can't say if that's their SOP, I'm just going by what I've witnessed before.
Okay, so that's how they would have gotten Mr. Arriola's DNA standard.
I believe so.
Does somebody go pick up this evidence from OMI, or how does it get to your facility?
More times than not, they will send it to me via mail. Depending on, I have gone down there to actually pick up evidence from time to time, but for the most part, I've received it in the mail.
And then how does it get to the lab?
I go through the big box. It usually comes in a big box or an envelope. I open that up, confirm all the items match the list, the packing list that they gave us. And then I process the evidence as if I had collected it as seen, inventory it on, at that time, UDS, create an evidence report, and then place it in the locker for evidence tech to process.
And that would be, your evidence tech then just takes it to the lab and picks it up from the lab?
Yes.
Okay, and then it goes back into evidence?
Yes.
Okay. As part of your investigation, did you determine who was the owner of the AR-15?
Yes.
Who was the owner?
Dean Cummings.
Okay, now on March 1st, did you also have contact with other witnesses? Did you do any follow-up interviews?
I'm sure I did. To my recollection, through this investigation, I can't say specifically March 1st, but through the investigation, I spoke with Mr. Cummings' dad via telephone.
Okay.
I've interviewed Miss Landers.
Okay.
I did on March 1st, I did do the death notification.
Okay.
And through the whole investigation, it's very difficult for me to remember that far
Okay.
back
Okay.
without recollection.
So you interviewed Miss Landers on March 6th, 2020?
Yes.
A couple of days after?
Yes.
Okay. And did you collect anything from Miss Landers?
I believe I collected a real estate contract.
Okay. And then as case agent, do all of the different things you sent out for testing then subsequently come back to you?
Yes.
All of the reports?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever requested nitrate lab testing on an item of evidence?
No. To be honest, I don't even know what that is.
Okay. Have you ever requested ejection pattern testing on an item of evidence?
Not in a case that I've worked.
Does the state lab even do that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And are you familiar with MACE, sir?
Yes,
How many times have you yourself been sprayed with mace?
over 10 times.
Is this one of the less than lethal weapons used by law enforcement?
Oh, yes. It's classified as a defensive deterrent, not a offensive.
Have you been present when mace has been deployed
Yes.
on other persons? Or?
Yes.
Okay. How many times?
For total, well over 20.
In your 27 years or so?
Yes.
What does it smell like?
The easiest way I can explain is if anybody's tried to peel roasted chili at home and you sit there for an hour and your eyes swell up and it gets in your face and you can't breathe, multiply that by about 10, and then that's like a direct spray from a pepper spray. It closes your eyes, it swells your eyes shut most of the time. It's a very debilitating feeling, and it's not a good substance.
How long does those effects typically last?
From my experience only,
Yes, sir.
Objection relevance.
I'll let him, with respect to his experience only, I'll let him answer that question.
the times I've been sprayed, it's lasted anywhere from an hour, as far as the real where I didn't feel I could go home safe, an hour to all day. You feel it for a few days.
And in your experience, does this get on clothing, bed sheets, anything in the area?
Yes. It was very common for me to get told to change in the garage on instances like that.
Okay. Are you familiar with commercial mace that's sold to the public?
In a way, I provided it, to family members and suggested they get some for travel and safety.
Okay, and does it work typically the same way for defense?
Objection foundation.
Sustained.
In your experience with commercial mace, does it sometimes contain a dye?
Yes.
Objection foundation.
Overruled.
Yes, it does.
Why is that?
That's primarily to help law enforcement identify attackers, kind of like the bank bags that have the exploding dye packs. This is along those lines.
And in your experience, either you yourself being maced or other people being maced or you purchasing mace for family members like you stated, does an excess drip out of the can?
Yes, like you would a spray paint can or a hairspray. There's always some left on the nozzle or dripping down the side on your fingers.
And Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
And you wish to mark as State Exhibit 31, which
No, I'm good.
I've handed you State's Exhibit 30. That was the can of mace that was previously admitted, sir. Can you please pull it out? And describe to the jury, is this the typical can of mace that you have purchased for family members or seen commercially sold in stores?
Yes.
Can you tell us what your observations are on that?
It's black. It's small. It looks around the nozzle and entryway like dirt. Like it's kind of crudded up a little bit. There's a kind of like a reddish, orangish tint to some of the substance around.
Okay.
To me, it looks old.
Old?
Yes.
Does it appear that there's a dye in this one?
Objection foundation.
Sustained.
Detective, let's move on. I only have a couple more questions. Have you ever tripped and fallen to the ground before?
Yes.
Have you seen other people trip and fall?
Yes.
Okay. Have you witnessed people fall or when you've seen other people fall or you yourself have fallen, what is everyone's first reaction?
Not only through personal experience and witnessing, but also through OMI when you're trying to determine if a person fell, prior to death. Most people, you react to the direction that you're falling. The first thing you do is you brace yourself, and you open your hands, and you're just straight out, just trying to stop from falling.
Okay. And Lieutenant Tomlinson, have you had the occasion to see mace with red dye before?
Yes.
Does that one, Exhibit 30, look similar?
Yes.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor. All this stuff.
Counsel, approach the bench. Ms. Walker, approach the bench.
Lieutenant, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
Did the mace have dye in it or not?
It could.
No, that's not my question. Did the mace have dye in it or not?
I believe it did.
How do you know that? Did you spray it?
No, I did not.
Did you have it tested?
No, ma'am.
Are you speculating? You're guessing, right?
No, I'm going by experience and, previous knowledge. It looks to me like it was a can of mace that's sold, and that it has mace, or it has dye.
What are you basing that on?
The redness around the tip of the, can I show you?
I don't need you to show me.
Okay.
In a murder trial,
Yes, ma'am.
did the mace have dye in it or not?
I believe it did.
I don't know that for sure because you didn't bother to just spray it, right?
No, ma'am.
You couldn't just spray it to see if it had dye in it.
No, ma'am.
And you didn't send it anywhere to be tested.
No, ma'am.
Okay, how about this? This wouldn't be too hard. How about just contact the manufacturer and say, here's a picture of the mace can that I have. Can you tell me whether or not this model can take? Did you do that?
No, ma'am.
All right. On February 2020, did you look at that mace canister?
I don't believe I did.
So
I mean, maybe through pictures. I probably did through pictures. I don't recall exactly.
when was the first time that you looked at that mace can in person? Was it when trial started?
I don't recall.
Well, if it's in evidence and you go and you open it to look at it, there's a record of that, right?
Yes.
Is it written on the envelope?
The dates are all, I believe, 2022.
Are any of them you?
I don't believe so.
So the answer is no.
I would have opened it with a text, so I can't say whether I did or whether I didn't prior to this.
So if you open it with a tech, you don't have to put your name and the date on the envelope?
No, ma'am, she would,
Okay.
because I would return it to her to close it back up for me.
So what are the dates in 2022 that it was looked at?
So I have 10/31,
Of 2022?
4 of 20, which is probably when I sent it to the lab to get tested, because I don't recognize the initials. So that's 4/20 of 20. 2022. I can't tell the other date, it's covered up.
October 31st. Was that you? Can you remember
It
that
could
far
be.
ago?
I believe it says it was defense that opened it.
It was the defense attorneys. And the one in
believe so.
April, you think was when it was sent to the lab?
I have, no, 4/20 of 20 is when I believe it was sent to the lab.
Yeah, the one in April.
Yes, and then there's one from DPS from 1/27 of 21.
And that can't be you because you're not DPS.
Correct.
So based on the dates that you've just read, none of those could possibly have been you.
Correct.
All right. Now, it's my understanding that you were in the presence of Mr. Cummings for approximately 6 hours on or about the 29th and the 1st.
Yes.
And did you run a lapel camera?
No, we were.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you run a belt recorder?
No. To my knowledge, no.
You testified before the grand jury in this case, didn't you?
I don't recall.
Would it refresh your memory if you saw a transcript of the grand jury proceeding?
Possibly, but I don't recall going to grand jury at all.
And my question for you is, would it refresh your memory if you saw a transcript of who testified at the grand jury?
We can try. I don't know.
May I approach?
You may.
Lieutenant, have a look at that and tell me if that refreshes your memory as to whether or not you testified at grand jury.
You may.
Hold on.
Lieutenant, did that refresh your memory?
I still have no recollection of the jury, but I trust the transcript.
Well, and listen, you agree with me that, generally speaking, in a more substantive case, like a homicide case, it's typically the lead case agent who testifies at grand jury. Do you agree with that?
I agree.
And you're the lead case agent in this case?
I agree.
Okay. Now, I understand that this was 2.5 years ago.
Yes.
So, and I want to be fair to you, and I mean that. So we can go through the transcript, or we can just break and you can review the audio recording of the grand jury, because obviously the audio recording is you could actually hear the sound of your own voice.
Sure.
So if you prefer to do that, I'm happy to do that. I don't want you to feel like I'm pushing a transcript
No.
in front of you that may not be accurate.
Sure. May I answer?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, whatever
No,
you'd like to do.
I would be happy to explain to you and the court why.
No, we
but
don't need
it's-
an explanation. We
right.
just want to take your testimony.
Sure.
So would you like to go ahead and move through the transcript with me, or do you think it would be better if we took a break and you could hear the audio? Sir.
We can go through the transcript together. I'm just letting you know that I do trust the transcript. I
Okay.
have no issues with that. I'm just being honest with the court that I physically do not remember appearing at grand jury.
I understand.
That's all I'm saying.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to beat you up for that.
Right.
I understand police officers are human beings. There's a lot of things that go on. They have a lot of different cases, and it's hard to remember something from 2.5 years ago.
Right.
Okay? So if at any point we're looking at the transcript and you feel like perhaps the transcript is incorrect, let me know, and we can take a break and listen to the audio.
Very good.
Okay? Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Very good.
All right, thank you. And I understand that you probably are not going to recall the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it on the off chance that you do.
Of course.
Prior to giving your testimony before the grand jury, do you know if you met with anyone from your investigative team?
I'm sure that I met with Sergeant Griffin, obviously, because he was at the scene. I do know that the two other detectives did, after the fact, assist us with parts of the investigation. So if that answers your question,
You're sure that you met with Griffin?
yes.
Okay,
yes.
but it sounds like you're not sure whether you met with the other two.
No, I do know. I met with the other two in other aspects of it, so,
Prior to, did
Prior
you
to
meet
grand
with?
jury.
Okay, you met with them prior to grand jury?
yes.
Okay, great. Who are those detectives?
Sergeant Griffin, Detective Miller, and Detective Salas.
Were all of those detectives out at the scene?
No.
Okay. Was it only Griffin that was out at the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm going to ask you this, and then we're going to have to go through a memory refreshment, and so I'm just going to leave that transcript in front of you.
Very good.
For your convenience. When you testified at the grand jury, of course, you testified about Mr. Cummings withholding his name and identification.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Well, when you testified at grand jury, of course, you would have testified about the crime of concealing identity.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's, the allegation is that Mr. Cummings failed to provide his name and identifiers, correct?
Correct.
Now, when you testified before the grand jury, isn't it true that you said they Mirandized him, he refused to answer. And if you don't recall, I'll point you.
I trust you. If it's in here, if it's in the transcript, then I have no doubt that I testified to that in grand jury.
Okay, so as we have heard, he was not Mirandized, and so I'm just wondering if he wasn't Mirandized, why would you have told the grand jury that he was?
What page are we on?
Page 6. It's like the second sentence that he testifies to.
Regarding this case, I would have probably been provided that information, which subsequently changed. I wasn't at the scene that it was describing, so it possibly was information coming from one of the deputies at the scene that, and then they changed their information later on.
Okay, fair. In preparation for this trial, did you listen to the entire hour-and-a-half audio recording that was created by the belt recorder of Mr. Walker?
I don't believe I listened to the whole hour and a half. I believe
Okay.
it, because there was, as I recall, it, you know, that I've listened, there's a lot of blank time, driving type stuff. They're just sitting there, not a lot of conversation.
Okay. You indicated to the grand jury there was no evidence at the scene or on Mr. Cummings that indicated that mace had been utilized. Is that right?
According to the transcript, yes.
Well, the evidence at the scene that mace was utilized is that there was a mace can in the decedent's hand. You agree that that is some evidence, correct?
That's evidence Mace was at the scene, yes.
And you wrote a fairly lengthy and detailed report in this case, didn't you?
I believe so.
I trust you reviewed your report
Yes,
before taking the witness stand?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you agree with me that in your report, you indicate that mace lasts about 45 minutes to an hour?
Yes. I mean, when you're sprayed on somebody before you can recover, like I testified, yes.
Okay, and that's what's in your report. Do you agree with me that there were no police officers who arrived within that time frame?
I think that would be, well, from the first 911, yes. I believe that's a fair statement.
Okay. And what time was it that you initially had your person-to-person contact with Mr. Cummings?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What time was it that you initially had your contact with Mr. Cummings?
If we can, I can refer to the CAD for a more accurate, the CAD report.
Or do you recall at all, or do you need the CAD?
Drive time from the location to our office, so 45 minutes to an hour, so maybe around, again, I'm guessing 11 o'clock. It'll be in the CAD when the deputy arrived at the office.
Okay, but you're guessing around 11 o'clock.
That would be good.
So do you agree with me that when you testified before the grand jury, you said, I was able to talk to Mr. Cummings for 6 hours and never smelled any of it?
If it's in the transcript, then yes, that's what I said.
But what you didn't tell the grand jury is that you didn't have contact with Mr. Cummings until 5 or 6 hours after the mace was used.
Correct.
Okay. And isn't it true that you testified before the grand jury, you said, we were able to recover his clothing that he did toss into the back of the truck after searching for?
If that's what I was in the transcript, then that's what I said.
What page are you on?
11 down at the bottom. But what you didn't tell the grand jury was Mr. Cummings actually brought the clothing that he had taken off to the attention of officers and asked the officers to please maintain it and put it in a bag. You didn't tell the grand jury that, did you?
No, I did not. If it's in the transcript, no.
You made some statements to the grand jury about shell casings and trajectory, and I'm at the bottom of page 12. So let me ask you, isn't it true that you said to the grand jury, the pattern of the shell casings, the general trajectory indicated that all the shots were shot forward towards Mr. Arriola? Do you agree that you made that statement?
My name's on it, yes, ma'am.
Okay. You now understand that some of these shots went directly into the floor, correct?
I'm not a ballistics expert, but I would not argue that.
You've been sitting in the courtroom and you
Yeah.
heard the testimony about the scorch marks and the muzzle having to be just maybe on the floor or a couple inches off the floor. Okay. So do you agree that your testimony that you gave to the grand jury was incorrect?
At the time with the information I had, that is what I believe I testified here to. Again, I'm not a ballistics expert. I wasn't at the scene. I was going by photographs and information provided to me from Sergeant Griffin. So I can't say that things haven't changed between then and now.
Well, but the person who did the trajectory documentation at the scene was Agent Herrera, correct?
Correct.
And it sounds like you didn't talk to Agent Herrera before you went before the grand jury and gave your testimony about trajectory.
I don't recall if I did or didn't.
Okay. You indicated to the grand jury, and I'm in that same paragraph there. It did appear that Mr. Arriola was trying to remove himself from the room and was not in an attacking position.
Correct.
Do you think that the evidence bears that out?
Yes.
Tell me how it looks that Mr. Arriola was trying to remove himself from the room when he fell face forward, completely away from the door.
My opinion?
Well, I'm
Is what you're
asking,
asking?
what's the basis for the testimony that you gave the grand jury?
Based on the OMI report, based on the injuries to Mr. Arriola, the number of rounds. I believe he was, if I may, I believe he was turning to go out the door when he was shot and then fell. But I think momentum carried him to the position he was. It's a very small room. So my opinion is that still that he was trying to leave.
Even though his body is not in a position where he's turning away from the shooter, if the shooter is in that corner where we talked about with Agent Herrera.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
It could be, and I believe it was. My opinion.
So is it your testimony that you believe that the findings from OMI support the conclusion that Mr. Arriola was trying to remove himself from the room?
I believe he was trying to remove himself from the shooter, based on my opinion only.
But what you indicated was that part of what caused you to believe that was the OMI findings. So we've heard from OMI. What about that testimony caused you to say this to the grand jury?
The direction of travel from the wounds right to left in a downward fashion. That's what I believe, and to me, he had to be bent over to take those wounds.
Isn't it true that you told the grand jury, tentatively, what we're believing is that Mr. Arriola began to take fire from Mr. Cummings. He ducked, turned, and started to run towards the door, which that caused him to suffer the 2 fatal wounds he had and actually caused him to fall deceased to the ground? You stand by that?
The generalness of it at the time with the information we had, I believe a lot of that contributes to it.
Do you stand by it now? Do you stand by that statement?
I don't believe now, after learning everything about the scene, that he made the actual complete turn to the door. Given the internal injuries, I believe he was started that way, which is why he took the rounds on the trajectory where they did and then landed where he was.
And isn't it true that you told the grand jury, we're waiting for trajectory test results? And for counsel, that's kind of the middle of page 17. And you also said, let me complete your sentence. We're waiting for trajectory test results to come back, which takes an amount of time to get it right.
I'm sorry? We're still waiting for toxicology to come back.
We're waiting for trajectory test results.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
that's the wrong one.
you're the paragraph below me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
Where are those trajectory test results?
I presumed that the firearms division at the lab or Agent Herrera would be conducting those, but apparently that wasn't done.
But isn't it true that they only do those things if the case agent requests it?
Not necessarily. If they, when they're processing the crime scene, if they determine that this is, if they determine that it's necessary, then they'll do it themselves.
Yes, sir, but you're the case agent. So
Correct.
if you wanted trajectory testing done,
Correct.
you could have made sure that it was done.
Yes, and I can't recall if I requested it or I didn't request it. I can't recall if I can't recall.
Have you ever seen a piece of paper that indicates that you requested that?
No, I do not.
Do you have any recollection of talking to anyone and asking anyone to do that?
I don't have recollection of that.
Okay. You told the grand jury, I don't believe drugs or alcohol were relevant to the actual incident that occurred. Isn't that what you said? And it's the last sentence in that paragraph that started with, we're still waiting for toxicology to come back.
Yes.
Do you stand by that statement?
At the time of this transcript, yes.
And how about now?
I would say yes.
Really?
Yes.
Now, the decedent's personal effects, what's in their pockets and stuff like that, that all goes to OMI, correct? With the body.
Normally it does.
And that's what happened in this case, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So when do you get those items back from OMI?
The time frame varies whenever their evidence group sends it back to us.
Do you know when you got them back in this case?
I don't have an exact date unless I can refresh.
Do
with
you
my
have the
report.
items here in this bag or in this box?
From OMI?
Yeah, the personal effects.
I believe I have a wallet. I believe there was a wallet that you requested.
Would looking at that envelope give you any idea?
Probably.
All right.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object as to relevance. Can we approach?
You may.
Lieutenant, you and I had a discussion yesterday, and we went through some of Mr. Arriola's personal effects. You recall that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I'm after. Are they here in this box?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm guessing it's this.
I believe so.
May I hear it?
Thank you. I think they both need to be entered. They haven't been entered as evidence yet. Okay.
Can you go ahead and look at the same items that you and I looked at yesterday? Did you have an opportunity to look at those?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see two separate folded up pieces of white paper?
Yes, ma'am.
And what else is in that bag?
There is a, may I open it or just,
Can you just look
Sure.
and tell us? I mean,
looks like the handyman tool, currency, some change, a chapstick, a washer.
so I'm going to stop you there. So the only thing that has evidentiary value from my perspective are the two pieces of paper. Do you want us just to put this whole bag into evidence, Judge, or do you
No.
want us to separate it out?
Just separate it out.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, great.
Awkward question. I don't know if this is paper or lint. Do you want it or not? Seriously, I really,
That's all I want.
that's all you want? Okay, I just wanted to double check.
I'm going to go ahead and mark this as Defendant's Exhibit O. If you didn't mind.
Not at all.
Just so the jury can see it a little bit better.
Oh, sure.
Through the bag, that's all I'm doing right there.
Would you like me to do it?
I got it.
Okay,
There you go. Thank you, sir.
sure.
Do you agree with me that those white folded up pieces of paper, that it is typical of the way that cocaine or other powdered drugs are packaged?
I have seen them packaged in a similar manner.
And when did you receive that information from OMI, if you can tell?
So this was tagged into evidence on 5/7 of 2020. So it would be within a week of two of that I received it from OMI.
Okay. Did you ever look at it?
The papers,
Any of that stuff, any of the personal effects that you got, did you look at that stuff?
No. I mean, let me rephrase. It was listed. I tried my best not to open anything from OMI to tag straight in, especially personal effects. And so I glanced through it to confirm that that was in there, which is 2 pieces of paper.
Why wouldn't you have looked at the personal effects to see if they were relevant to the case in any way?
Well, I mean, I did through the bag. I didn't examine them or separate them out or anything like that.
Okay.
And verified that that was in the bag from the packing slip.
Okay, and you didn't indicate in your report that there was anything that looked like drug packaging?
No.
Okay. Permission to publish, I can do it on the Elmo, or I can hand it to the jurors.
Show it here. You haven't moved for admission yet, though.
Oh, thank you. Move for the admission of Defendant's Exhibit O.
To be admitted.
You want me to help this? There we go. I think it's ready. don't you
Yes,
think?
it's ready.
Okay. Well, kind of hard to see.
Maybe a black piece of paper or dark paper and put it on top.
Okay. And you agree with me that the way that paper is folded numerous times in that fashion is typical of packaging for illicit powder narcotics?
It could be.
You've seen that in your career?
Yes, I have.
All right. And do you agree with me that there was also a straw on Mr. Arriola's person?
I'm not sure if it was a straw or a pen with the stuff taken out. It was white and circular. I didn't examine it. We have it here.
Wait.
May I get some scissors, please? Yes, ma'am, I have it.
Let's go ahead and mark that as Defendant's Exhibit P.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'll move for the admission of Defendant's Exhibit P.
Be admitted.
You see that?
Yes, ma'am.
And you agree with me that what this is a big pen that has the top, the center, and the end removed?
Correct.
And is this something that can be used to snort cocaine?
Can be, yes.
And based on your investigation, Mr. Arriola was known to carry mace.
Yes.
Let me just review my notes, one moment. So, you indicated to Mr. Cummings that you were going to test the swabs that you took of his face and hands for mace, right? Or for chemicals.
For chemicals, yes.
Did you do that?
I did send them to the forensics lab in Santa Fe.
Right, but you didn't request that they be tested for chemicals.
I have nothing on paper that says I did. I don't recall if I had a phone conversation or not with them about that. I don't recall that part, but there's nothing in my reports that say I did.
Well, and you've heard from the folks at the lab, and they testified that's not even anything they're capable of doing.
Correct.
So did you take any steps to get the swabs or the shirt tested as you told Mr. Cummings you would?
No.
You were asked on direct examination if you've ever requested testing for an ejection pattern, right?
Yes.
Well, the state lab has a ballistics unit, right?
I believe so.
Did you ask the ballistics unit at the state lab to do any testing for you?
I didn't even know they had a specific ballistics lab. It was all firearms is what I knew of, to send them up for firearms testing. My experience, the crime scene, people do the ballistic analysis as far as like trajectory and stuff and ejection. That would be, in my opinion, done at the scene. I didn't know they had a specific ballistic lab.
Did you ever call up to the state lab and say, what kind of testing can you guys do for me?
I don't recall if I did or not.
One moment.
Okay.
Just for completeness, did Mr. Arriola also have a marijuana pipe on his person?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's go ahead and move that into evidence. And let me just ask you, is that a typical looking marijuana pipe?
You want me to keep going? Open it all the way
Well,
up?
haven't you seen pictures of it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it's just a regular marijuana pipe, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I'm not going to have you open it
Okay.
and go through all that. We're just going to mark it as Defendant's Exhibit Q, and I'll move for its admission.
Just, Counsel, can we agree that it was just the same pipe that's in that picture?
Yes.
Okay. It'll be admitted.
The pipe?
Yes, it'll be
Okay,
admitted.
sure.
I don't want someone to speculate that there are two pipes.
And as a point of clarification, Mr. Arriola was not the only one of the two folks involved in this altercation who apparently used marijuana. Is that correct?
Could you rephrase it? Are you talking
Was
about?
there any evidence discovered that Mr. Cummings also used marijuana?
If I could refresh in my report, but I don't believe so.
okay.
Thank you.
I'll pass the witness.
Ms. Walker.
I just have a couple of follow-up questions for you, sir. So, and I'm going to start right where Ms. Morrissey left off. We talked a lot about your grand jury testimony and the transcript. I believe one of the grand jurors asked you, do you know whether there was drugs or alcohol involved in this? And your response was, Mr. Cummings, we did recover some marijuana in his unit. Do you remember that?
I don't recall it, but if it's in the transcript, I'll agree that I responded that way.
Now, grand jury proceedings are different than a trial. Is that correct?
Correct.
It's a finding of probable cause,
Yes.
and the people who are the grand jurors get to ask you questions, right?
Correct.
And they can ask pretty much on anything so long as they're curious and it's relevant to the case.
Correct.
Okay, so you testified at the grand jury on March 19th, 2020.
Okay.
Okay, pretty soon after the homicide.
Correct.
Would it surprise you that Agent Herrera didn't complete his report until April 7th, 2020?
No, that doesn't surprise me.
So you wouldn't have had any of his trajectory stuff or his report or anything that he did on scene?
Correct.
You wouldn't have had OMI at that point either?
I really doubt it. Normally, they'll send the report with the evidence. Sometimes they send it separately, but I doubt I would have had the OMI report by grand jury.
Okay, and you testified on cross-examination, which memory is a big part of testifying, right? This case is over 2
Correct.
years old. You
Correct.
testified that you physically do not remember testifying at the grand jury.
Correct.
Why is that?
Excuse me. In, July 2021, I was in a coma for 9 days. And because of that, I have some memory issues. Long-term, some short-term. I apologize.
So it's not that you don't remember testifying at the grand jury, you just physically don't have that memory anymore.
Correct.
Also in your question about the grand jury testimony about why you believe mace was not used, let me just find that page, I think it was 12. Do you believe that mace was not at all sprayed because it was pointing backwards at the decedent?
Objection, leading, and foundation.
Just lay a foundation for that. I'll allow the question, but lay the foundation for that.
Okay. Let me find the page then. On cross-examination, you were asked about your grand jury testimony and that you testified to the grand jury that you do not believe that the mace was ever used. Is that correct?
Objection, that is not the testimony that came during cross-examination, I don't believe. We talked about some of his testimony regarding the mace, but that statement didn't come out.
And I disagree. I believe it did come out.
Overruled, see if you find that in that grand jury testimony.
So at page 10, the very first paragraph, you were asked on cross-examination whether or not you testified there was no evidence at the scene or on Mr. Cummings that mace had been utilized. And the question was, do you still believe that statement?
Say that one more time, please.
Sorry, it's kind of convoluted. So you were asked on cross-examination whether or not you still believe that the mace had not been utilized.
Correct.
Why do you believe that?
There's a number of different factors in it. Typically when mace is sprayed, it remains in a room, it remains on clothing, it remains on people, it remains in the air, it remains, there's parts of it, it's just not poof and it goes away. It lingers, at least in some parts, and no one at the scene, even though there had been a great amount of time, I concede that there had been time between, there would have been an indicator somewhere of the odor. If there was color dye, which I believe there was, there would have been some remnants of that somewhere. But just the mere fact that there would have been some indication of mace discharge, someone with all the people going through, it would have been evident to them and they would have reported it to me.
What was the only piece of evidence that mace was used? Was it Mr. Cummings' statement?
Yes.
Was there any corroborating evidence that mace was used?
No corroborating evidence.
On cross-examination, you were asked, and this was on page 12 of the grand jury transcript, you were asked about your testimony during the grand jury, why you believe that Mr. Arriola was turning to leave the room.
Yes.
So tell me, what your testimony was, is tell me as Mr. Arriola was trying to remove himself from the room, why do you think he was trying to remove himself from the room?
I believe because the defendant had a rifle on him and began actively shooting, is why he tried to leave the room.
Right, but what makes you, with the physical evidence of where Mr. Arriola's body was positioned, believe that he was trying to leave the room?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay. So on cross-examination, you were asked about all the shots were shot forward toward Mr. Arriola, and Morrissey asked you why you believed he was trying to leave the room if you did not have the OMI stuff and you didn't have any of the other stuff. Can you stand up and show the jury how you believe Mr. Arriola was shot?
I'll do my best.
Thank you, sir.
Objection. Let's approach.
Let me ask this in a different way, sir.
Okay.
Can you verbally tell us how you believe Mr. Arriola was shot?
I believe as he entered the room where your momentum's traveling forward, the defendant began to shoot. I believe the first thing most people do when you hear a gunshot is duck, which would put him in a bent over position as he's stopping and trying to turn, and that's when he takes the lethal rounds, and even the one that didn't go in him, the one in the back for his clothing. His momentum's still slightly going one direction as he's turning, and then he just collapses down. Based on my experience with OMI, people and items fall in weird ways, and because you have no control. It's not set in physics.
Because of momentum.
Momentum, all kinds of other factors. And it could have been, we don't know what exactly momentum-wise, physics-wise happened in that brew.
Now, you were asked on cross-examination, Lieutenant Tomlinson, whether or not Mr. Arriola was known to carry mace.
Yes.
Was he known to carry mace with a die?
I was told he was.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Lieutenant, you may step down. Just be careful with that step, all right?
Yes, sir. Would you like me to leave this?
Yeah, leave everything there. State, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state rests.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the state has rested the case in chief. What we're going to do now, we're going to recess for the day and for the week. But let me read you that recess instruction that I read you at the beginning of the case, and then I'll give you a few scheduling information in a second. Okay. No, I'm okay. Need him to find him. During recess, do not discuss this case with other jurors or with any other person, or allow anyone to discuss the case with you or in your presence. You as jurors must decide this case based solely on the evidence presented here within the four walls of this courtroom. This means that during the trial, you must not conduct any independent research about this case, the matters in the case, and the individuals or corporations involved in the case. In other words, you should not consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, websites, blogs, or use any other electronic tool to obtain information about this case or help you decide the case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside the confines of this courtroom. Until you retire to deliberate, you may not discuss this case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin discussing the case with your fellow jurors, but you cannot discuss the case with anyone else until you have returned a verdict and the case is at an end. I know that many of you use cell phones, the internet, and other tools of technology. You also must not talk to anyone about this case or use these tools to communicate electronically with anyone about the case. This includes your family and friends. You may not communicate with anyone about the case on your cell phone or any other device that can access the internet, through email, text messaging, or on Twitter, through any blog or website, through any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking website such as Facebook. During your deliberations, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone by any means about the case. You may not use any electronic device or media such as a telephone, cell phone, or any other device that can access the internet, any internet service, or any text or instant messaging service, or any internet chat room, or by way of any other social networking websites such as Facebook, to communicate to anyone any information about this case, or to conduct any research about this case until I accept your verdict. Avoid any publicity this case may receive. And I know there's some out there, so avoid it at all costs. Do not read, listen to, or watch any news accounts of this trial. Do not express any opinion about this case or form any fixed opinion until the case is finally submitted to you for your decision. Now, we will resume this case Monday at 9 o'clock, be here by 8:45. But let me remind you, the clock changes over this weekend on Sunday. I think we go back to standard time. So I think you get to sleep an extra hour. So 9 o'clock on Monday. On Tuesday, if we're still going, I have a feeling this case is starting to sort of wrap up. But on Tuesday, if we have not concluded on Tuesday, we will recess early, like 2 hours, because people are entitled to go vote. And I'll give you the same courtesy they give state employees, which is 2 hours for voting. So on Tuesday, we would leave at 3, all right, and see where we're at that point. But for now, we'll be in recess, be here on Monday at 8:45, all right? We'll be in recess until then. On Tuesday. Yeah, yeah. Ms. Romo, understand you may need to take off. I understand you may need to leave because you have some kind of personal.
I can wait till after the motion to
Okay.
be.
Are you ready to proceed on those, or do you want a few minutes?
I'm ready.
We need
You
a
guys
few
ready?
minutes. That's-
That's okay? Take a 5 minutes. We'll go from there. Maybe seated back there.
That is not tampering. The evidence is also overwhelming that when he was washing his face and hands with the water from the spigot, he was doing so because his eyes and his skin were burning, and that he was trying to remove whatever it was, the irritant that was burning his skin and eyes. So there was no intent and there's no evidence of him trying to conceal or destroy evidence. To the contrary, all evidence shows he was trying to preserve these items for evidence. In regards to concealing identity, we also have uncontroverted evidence that Mr. Cummings called 911 himself directly. That is indisputed by the state's witnesses. When he called 911, he specifically told them his name and gave his phone number, and then of course went on to tell the operator what had happened at the ranch that day. But the evidence is indisputable that basically as of about 5:31 or 5:40 on February 29th, 2020, Mr. Cummings had already given his identity to authorities. So for those reasons, we would move for directed verdict.
Let me hear from the state.
Mr. Honor, and if I may at the podium.
You may.
Yes, sir. In regards to the second-degree murder and the voluntary manslaughter, the state puts forth that there has been sufficient evidence for this case to go to the jury in the light most favorable to the state and all reasonable inferences. The homicide was committed without sufficient provocation. There's no evidence that the mace was actually sprayed. There's no witness that smelled it, no witness that observed any physical sign that it was on the defendant's person. He didn't have any runny eyes. Nothing indicates that it was actually sprayed. He didn't have a rash. And indeed, the evidence shows that the can of mace in Mr. Arriola's hand was actually pointing at the decedent. It wasn't pointing out. Furthermore, there's no physical signs of a physical fight in that residence. None of the furniture's overturned. There are no marks or abrasions or anything of that nature on either party's hands to indicate that there was a fight. In fact, the only evidence of a fight came from opening statements, and that was it. Nothing came through the evidence.
Sorry, John. I was desperate. I apologize.
And, Your Honor, at the scene, the defendant said there was a fight for a gun, but again, there's been no evidence that there was actually a fight for the gun. In fact, the evidence shows that this was a homicide committed without sufficient provocation. Indeed, OMI even said that Mr. Arriola could have been on all fours when he was shot, again, indicating that this was committed without sufficient provocation. In regards to the tampering with evidence, the state asked that the court send this charge to the jury. The defendant told the officers he washed his face and changed his clothing. That's not in dispute. However, he did intend to prevent apprehension or prosecution of himself for these crimes. His interactions with Mr. McCullough, he comes up to Mr. McCullough, asks him about his motorcycle, leaves, comes back. Those interactions infer that he was intending to not turn himself in. He was intending to flee. He was trying to prevent the apprehension of himself for these crimes. He only called law enforcement after Mr. McCullough already called. He didn't call before. And so for these reasons and the evidence-based that the state has put forth so far, we would ask that the court send this charge to the jury. In regards to the concealing identity charge, which is New Mexico Statute 3022-3, Deputy Crespin testified that he asked the defendant for over 3 hours what his name was, and he refused to say. He even told him that if you don't tell me your personal identifying information, I'm going to charge you with concealing identity. And even then, he still continued to refuse. He would only say Dean. He didn't give his first name, his last name, or date of birth. And I believe Deputy Crespin even testified that he kept changing his date of birth. Just because he called Sandoval County Dispatch or the Bureau of Indian Affairs doesn't mean he's telling the law enforcement officer who's asking him right here and right now, what's your name, what's your date of birth? That doesn't mean that it gets transferred over. And for concealing identity, it consists of concealing one's true name or identity with the intent to obstruct the due execution of law, or with the intent to intimidate, hinder, or interrupt any public officer, which is exactly what he did on February 29th. And in the light most favorable to the state, we would ask that these charges do go to the jury. Thank you.
Ms. Moss, any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically regarding the tampering with evidence, the DA is twisting their own theory of the case. The tampering with evidence is based upon the defendant allegedly changing or hiding his clothing. It has nothing to do with whether he was trying to flee the scene, which is absolutely ridiculous. We've all heard the evidence. We know that is not true. But the charge is based upon the fact that he removed his shirt and his jacket and put him in the back of his pickup truck. The evidence is overwhelming that he did that to preserve the evidence, not to destroy or hide it. Furthermore, let me see here. Lost my train of thought on that. But so the evidence is overwhelming that he was doing that specifically to preserve evidence, not to in any way try to hide it or tamper with the prosecution. And also, the state is saying that there was no evidence on his clothing. So they're trying to have it both ways. They're saying that the mace was never sprayed, which means there's no evidence on the clothing, and yet he's still trying to destroy clothing. So it makes no sense. The state's now totally twisting their own theory in a desperate attempt to keep this count to the jury. Regarding the concealing identity, there is no evidence he was trying to in any way disrupt or interfere with an investigation. In fact, all of the evidence shows that he, in fact, was trying to further the investigation by providing his name as soon as he possibly could to law enforcement. Also by telling them his father was coming. All of this information that he provided to law enforcement freely that shows that he was not in any way trying to conceal his identity.
All right, the standard on these motions is in viewing the evidence that lies most favorable to the state, is there legally sufficient evidence for this matter to go to the trial of fact? I'm going to deny the motion with respect to the second-degree murder and the lesser included. I'm going to find there is legally sufficient evidence for those charges to, that charge or the lesser included to go to the final fact. I am going to grant the motion of directed verdict with respect to the tampering with evidence and the concealing ID. There's no evidence of that in the eyes of the court, but the murder charge will stay, and that one will go to the trial of fact, which is the jury. So, folks, have a safe weekend, and we will see you Monday at be here by 8:45. All right.
All rise.
Let us give you back your external hard drive. That one is actually mine.
No, I know.
Barb, I hope everything's okay for you.
Thank you.
No, I was like, did you take the hard drive from Wes?
I